All right, hello everyone. I hope you're doing well. Just, I'll go through some of my background while Liz pulls up my presentation. I am the Environmental Justice Coordinator at DHEC. I have been with DHEC in one capacity or another for, I'm going to say it out loud, 25 years. I have a civil engineering degree from Clemson University. And so the programming at the time at Clemson was really all about pipes and pumps and steel, concrete, things of that nature. Very rarely anything nature-based. And I was looking at some of the questions you had about how do we incorporate nature-based solutions into anything we're working on, and I think we really have to start with the schools, because I don't remember learning anything about nature-based solutions, period, ever. Maybe it's changed now since it's been a little while, but I suspect it's still primarily pumps and pipes and steel and concrete and things of that nature. I started out in the, what we call the Superfund program. It's a hazardous waste cleanup program at DHEC. Lots of remediation, lots of pipes and pumps and steel and concrete to try to reduce or get rid of exposure to contaminants to the people and to animals. And that's what we did. As Environmental Justice Coordinator, I appreciate the pictures with the boxes. I use that a lot. I should have brought my picture because I've got a third panel that says justice, and there are no boxes, but it's also no fence. So it's a systemic change. You don't have the Band-Aid with the boxes. You get rid of the barrier, the cause of the injustice and inequality. Maybe next time. All right. So primarily I like to talk about a project that I'm working on with several partners, including LAMPC, Omar, Muhammad, Clemson University, USC. We're actually working together, yes. Coast College in Charleston, and it's funded by the EPA, and I feel like I'm missing someone. That's everybody. So it's called EJ Strong. The official title is EJ Strong, Strengthening Communities for Disaster Risk Reduction, Response, and Recovery in South Carolina. What does that mean? It means collaboration, resilience, capacity building, and these are all words we've already, and phrases we've already used today, and they really resonate with me. I'm glad we are talking about these concepts. And Dr. Gibbs came up here and gave her speech and said you could get $1 for 400 pounds of cotton. I immediately thought, well, you have to collaborate, because how do you even carry 400 pounds of cotton by yourself? You have to collaborate with others and get together and build wealth and build capacity in order to buy the land for $1.25 an acre, because you can't do it by yourself. I mean, probably can't do it by yourself. And that will lead to resilience. So EJ Strong is really a community-managed disaster risk reduction model. We are empowering communities, particularly environmental justice communities, to think about disasters before they happen. Planning, responding during a hazard, and then rebuilding after. So essentially, building the ark before it starts to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. We are emphasizing the importance of EJ communities to be empowered to prepare for hazards. Right now, our emergency response process tends to be, we have the emergency managers who are professionals. They do these things every day, they do their tabletops, they do the training, but the community piece is often missing. I don't know about you, but let's say a hurricane comes through, I see the governor on TV, ETV, He has his clipboard, and his agency heads are behind him, and they say, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then they leave. And there's no real discussion about, well, if I don't have a car, how am I going to evacuate? Okay, I have a car, I can evacuate, where am I going to go? I don't have money for a hotel. I have a house that I live in, this extra $100, $200, $300, $400 a night, depending on where you go. I don't have it. So people don't evacuate, either because they don't want to or they can't. And there's a lack of preparation in that. And so we're trying to fill in that gap and have a community managed response to a hazard as opposed to an individual response to a hazard. There was a movie that J-Lo did back in 2002 when her friends, I like a quote she gave her. It's a, babe, it's not what you know and what you have, it's who you know and what they got. And that is so true in terms of working together in order to prepare for and survive a hazard. All right, so as I said before, EJ Strong is actually a EPA grant. We call it a SEJCA, so that's the State Environmental Justice Cooperative Agreement. It is for $200,000. Originally, it was for 2 years, but because of COVID, we were able to extend it for another year. We also initially were just going to do classroom trainings, but we had to pivot, and now we are doing online and classroom hybrid together. So those of you who've done hybrid know that essentially you're running 2 different workshops at the same time, which is a lot more work. But it's also rewarding, especially professionally, because at DHEC we have a lot of hearings, a lot of meetings. People actually seem to participate more if you have that hybrid option. So it's been a real learning experience. I'm glad that we were able to do this and then translate it into the professional world. So everybody is learning, not just the community, but also the so-called professionals like myself. Just really quickly, the purpose of the SEJCA is to support or create a model state for states that lead to measurable environmental or public health results in communities disproportionately burdened by environmental harms and risks. These models should leverage or utilize existing resources or assets of state agencies to develop key tools and processes. So this is actually going to be a model for the entire country. The concept of CMDRR actually comes out of the Philippines, and we're fortunate to have very knowledgeable trainers who actually were in the Philippines during the building of the CMDRR in the Philippines. So now they're in the United States at USC, primary trainers, and so we're very fortunate to have them as with us as partners. So some of the objectives of EJ Strong is to assist in the identification and prevention of disaster-related environmental and health effects, especially flooding within communities. Flooding has been topic number 1 for the different communities we work with. There's North Charleston, there's Rosamond in Charleston, they sit on the marsh. There's even Lower Richland, Columbia. They actually sit at the end or at the downhill portion of Richland County, where all the water flows top to bottom into the Calgary Swamp. So they're concerned about flooding, but not only just the flooding piece, but also what the waters are picking up as it rises and flows towards communities. We have factories, we have roads, we have stuff buried, and so the water picks that up and it sits, and then you see the pictures of people walking through the stuff. That's dangerous, okay? That's something you shouldn't do. If you turn around, don't drown, but also don't get sick because you don't know what's in that water. So, also objectives to conduct disaster planning and capacity building, especially while identifying vulnerable communities. Identify and direct needed resources during and after a disaster. Increase individual and community resilience, and practice hands-on exercises in response to recovery and mitigation activities. And we'll get a little bit into some of the nature-based solutions that I thought of as I was going through and creating this presentation. So to try to stay on point. But some more learning objectives. This is actually a map that Clemson University worked on. It's a food access map. So during the beginnings of the pandemic, Clemson University noted that several community members were having trouble accessing food. Either they were laid off and so you don't have the money to purchase, or in my case, the grocery store shut down for several days. And then the restaurants were balls up. I mean, either they were closed, or were trying to move the tables outside just so they could make money. So that led to Clemson University creating a food access map for the 10 upstate counties. And it's a GIS-based map locating food pantries, places that serve hot food or deliver food, or you can pick up food. There's a group called Sustaining Way that actually created a food pickup point because of the pandemic and community members not being able to access particularly fresh food. So this is online now. Anybody can access it. There are over 900 locations on this map. You can type in an address or just a zip code, and it can tell you where the food pantries are near you. And United Way actually has a text messaging service now. You text food to 211-211 and you get a list sent to your phone. So resilience, capacity building, collaboration. E.J. Strong funded this particular piece of the map. So more objectives, lessons learned and best practices, identifying additional training needs, and evaluating ways to mobilize after disaster with an emphasis on food insecurities, thus the food map. Ecosystems, the causes, effects, extent, prevention, reduction, and possible elimination of water and air pollution following a disaster. And I can give you the link for you to share too. This is a picture of us looking at the marsh in Rosemont. We were doing a field practicum. So the two concerns for the community were flooding and toxic releases. So on point there, that's not unusual right now with the communities we're working with. Ideally, we have what we call captains of the community. So we're working primarily in North Charleston, but it's actually a statewide project. You have people in Greenville, people in Columbia, people in the Aiken area who are also participating in trying to get trained up on how to do these assessments that we do. We look at vulnerabilities, we look at capacity, we look at the hazards, what are the primary concerns for a community, and how to actually respond to these hazards. A couple of things that we've learned already, a paradigm shift. The first one is there's a disaster risk formula that is often used in emergency management. Disaster risk equals hazard multiplied by vulnerability. Vulnerability has been defined many, many different ways, but the traditional meaning tends to not only get into where you're located, as if you're sitting on the marsh, you're probably vulnerable to flooding, but it also gets into how much money do you have, or do you do you have to use a wheelchair, or some kind of physical or political or social construct to make your designation vulnerable. So what the shift is disaster risk at community managed disaster response is hazard times vulnerability divided by capacity. So we're acknowledging that people do have resources. You might have a satellite phone, access to clean water, like a well, or you have bottled water stacked up in your house that people do have that. Or you have a car, or you have contact with someone at, let's say, Fort Jackson, and they have helicopters, and they can come save someone who's on the top of their house, and that's not outside the realm of possibility. That really did happen in 2015 during the flooding in Columbia, and the dams broke. There was a woman and her baby. They were stuck in their house. Fort Jackson came with their helicopter and saved them because someone in the community had that connection. Okay, so capacity, which to me means resilience, and also that you're not stuck because you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable because of where you're located, not because of who you are. So that's the paradigm shift number 2. I apologize for people in the back, but this is showing 4 houses. There's an uphill house, one in the kind of center, and then 2 at the bottom of a riverbed. And the water is rising. And the traditional idea of vulnerability, there's a rich house and a poor house at the bottom of the hill. The poor house is being flooded, and the rich house, no problem, even though they're literally next door to each other. That's how we're thinking about vulnerability in terms of income and who you are, not where you are. The paradigm shift is the same 4 houses, same flooding, but the rich house and the poor house are flooding because they're in the same location, not because the house is nicer and you have flat screen TV. It's because you're at the bottom of the hill, so you're flooding. So that's another paradigm shift. This here is a picture of a logic model that we had to submit for EPA. Just what our outputs, what are we wanting to do? So we are planning to have 4 workshops in person. We've done 2. We've done a lot of virtual presentations. We ideally want to package all of this into a professional webinars so that, like I said before, we're a model and that we can distribute all of this nationally. Okay, nature-based solutions. So this is my favorite picture because it explained, when I was doing engineering at Superfund, explained my role, and also I like it because it explains my role as environmental justice coordinator. So just the general idea, there are several big hazards on this poster, and we'll do a close-up in a little bit, but here is a landfill that's on fire. I've had a couple of projects like that. The landfill's on fire. There are people out there trying to put out the fire. They're putting water on the trash. The trash is flowing down the mountain of trash and going into a pond, creating a secondary release. There's another landfill down here. It's not on fire, thankfully, but it was basically an open dump, and people were trying to cover it up and stop that exposure to the community. Unfortunately, there's leachate coming out of it, so the groundwater is getting contaminated. There is a system pumping system where they're pulling out the contamination, running it through some filters, and clean water comes out the other side. And then here is a old factory where they stored drums. They killed the grass and the trees, and there's an open lagoon here. So looking at the close-up, let's look at the trash fire. There are bulldozers everywhere. There's people in moon suits. There's some guys down here picking up the trash out of the pond, putting it in the drums, and they're gonna ship it off to God knows where. None of this is nature-based. And I'm thinking, in an emergency, you're probably not thinking about nature and growing trees and grass or whatever. You're thinking, stop the fire. The good thing to do is probably to plan in advance. If this happens, we could do this, and this is probably a better way to handle the situation. I don't know what the nature-based solution would be, but I'm sure there is one. Probably not to even have this situation, where you have the trash built up. Maybe we can recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle, all right? All right, next, we have the old landfill with the leachate. So typically, when you use a cap, put in a cap, you have what we call a geotextile. It's plastic. So you're trying to stop the rainwater from going through the trash and creating that leachate. That's not natural, of course, but on top you typically put a clay barrier, and it has to have a specific permeability, and it's all written in the regulations, and if you don't abide by the regulations, you get fined, right? So that's another point of why maybe nature-based solutions aren't being used, because they're not written in the regulation. Okay? You're not gonna rock the boat, you just do what you're supposed to do and just move on instead of having to fight doing something different. And I get that. I mean, you have a lot of work to do, and you do what you need to do, and you move on to the next project. Here, you have the pumping. We call this pump and pray, because you'll never get out every last molecule of pollution. Wells could be pumped for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And then you start having this conversation called technically impracticable. And people at DA don't like this conversation. So you probably don't get put off. And the next conversation is, well, we could try something else. Is that something else going to be a nature-based solution? Hopefully, because the mechanical one is not working, or not well enough where you can declare victory. And this is expensive. You have to have power, you have to have somebody come out and check these filters and clean the filters and make sure the ducts are okay, because it is discharging into a duck pond, and it's probably not very quiet, and there are houses all around, and you probably get complaints saying, what's that noise? When are you going to get finished your pumping and praying? It's like, probably not going to, but you can't say that. All right, and that last picture with the dead grass and trees. There's a vac truck here sucking up the lagoon and taking it off to God knows where. Probably maybe a public treatment facility, which gets put through more processes that are not nature-based and then discharged into a pond or a river, and then downstream from that discharge point is the intake for where people are getting their drinking water. Everything is connected. I think it was Cheryl's presentation where she was emphasizing that. All right, so I know we throw stuff away and it disappears, but it's going somewhere. And it's probably gonna come back and you're gonna see it in a different form. Something that has been looked at and studied that I'm aware of significantly is phytoremediation. I am involved in a group called ITRC, and they wrote a couple of technical guidances about phytoremediation. Basically, certain trees take up pollution, and then particularly volatile organics, their processes in their trunks and leaves, you get clean air, clean oxygen, and things of that nature. So it's sucking up the contamination, and then it's a passive remedy. It's a popular remedy because you don't have the pumps and the pipes. It's not fast. We as a society like fast, but that is a potential nature-based solution that I have looked at and worked on and have had studies on for some of my sites. But I'm sure there are many, many more, and I did speak with Elizabeth about some of them, and I think a key, again, is school training, and it has to be a regimented type setup. I know Cheryl made a dig at engineers and how we like processes, and it's true. I just love it because it means there's an end point. If there's no end point, then you're in trouble, at least with engineers, and there's a lot of us at DA. This is my contact information, my office as well as cell number, and my email address. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Keisha.